Oh, there we go. That's better. So thank you all, and thank you for being here, and thank you for joining us on Treaty 6 land as we bring this year's Council of the Federation summer meeting to a successful conclusion. As you know, the new Premier of BC could not be here with us. He has some other important work to do over the last couple of days, including getting sworn in. But I know I do speak for everyone here at this table in offering our congratulations to Premier Horgan and the new BC government. British Columbians are also dealing with a wildfire emergency right now, with tens of thousands of people displaced. So I'd like to reiterate what I said at the beginning of this meeting. Everyone at this table stands with British Columbia. We offer whatever support is needed to save lives and care for those who have been evacuated, and we will ensure that our citizens in each of our respective provinces are aware of how they can make a contribution to this effort by contributing to organizations like the Red Cross. Let me also say that it was, for me, an enormous pleasure to host the premiers here in Edmonton. I hope you all found some time to enjoy our city, and I know I can speak on behalf of all Edmontonians that we were very honored to have you here. Every premier shares a common ambition for the provinces we represent and for our country as a whole. We are here to make life better. We are here to focus on whatever matters to our citizens. Good jobs, a growing economy, strong public services, these are Canadian priorities. They are our priorities. And over the last 3 days, they've been our focus in this meeting. So yesterday, as we've mentioned a bit before already, we focused on trade and the environment. These two go hand in hand. The communiqué outlined our agreement on Canada's relations with the United States, expanding trade links with China, and the role of environmental laws and reviews in sustaining economic growth. To address the devastating toll of wildfire and flooding, we also looked at helping Canadians adapt to shifting weather patterns and at better disaster financial assistance and less red tape and higher funding thresholds to help communities recover quickly. Common to both trade and the environment is a shared approach to innovation and more flexibility in new infrastructure funding. And that theme continued into today with a brief discussion about the Canadian Energy Strategy. The fact is there's been notable progress on advancing shared priorities and harmonizing standards. And we're confident that its continued implementation will prepare Canada for a reliable energy future. Today's talks were devoted to health and social issues. The high cost of food for northern populations was a very important topic for discussion, and it built on the conversation that we had yesterday about the particularly urgent needs of northern Canada when it comes to adaptation efforts. We had a very important set of descriptions about the urgency of this situation in northern Canada, and we agreed that the federal Northern Nutrition North Canada program must be improved to ease the financial burden on communities and to improve access to healthy food in these communities. Pharmaceutical drugs were a topic of conversation today as well, and we agreed that we will continue to work together to find ways to lower prices for Canadians across this country, and that we will work to explore options for better drug coverage that respects the needs and challenges of each province and territory. Our conversations today also included the justice system, and we shared details of our efforts that are working to ease courtroom backlogs and the delays in the wake of the Supreme Court of Canada's Jordan decision. Provincial justice ministers will continue to work to share best practices resulting from pressures that have grown as a result of the Jordan decision. In addition, we had a conversation about how some regions are seeking a particular influx of asylum seekers, and we talked about the need for Ottawa to ramp up the speed for processing these refugee claims. Let me turn as well to the issue of the opioid crisis. No region in Canada is immune to the opioid crisis. Families are being torn apart and promising lives are being cut short on a daily basis. This was an issue that was put on the agenda by BC, but all provinces took the time to engage in the conversation because we understand it is a growing issue we must all face. While every jurisdiction is responding individually, pan-Canadian collaboration is essential if Canada is to address the epidemic. To combat this crisis, provinces and territories are strongly committed to using a harm reduction approach to mitigate this crisis and will continue to deploy a range of evidence-based tools to prevent further tragic deaths as well as sharing best practices. As we work together, we are calling on the federal government to undertake further concrete actions to improve health and public safety in Canada. We also had a broad-ranging discussion on cannabis legalization, and I think it's fair to say that took up a good part of our morning. It became clear to us that there are 5 significant areas that the federal government needs to provide more clarity on with answers to substantive concerns. They include road safety and enforcement and the mechanisms associated with that, preparations and training for distribution networks, taxation arrangements and overall cost coverage, public education campaigns, and supply, demand, and the relationship of supply and demand to the black market. Premiers around this table agreed that should the federal government not engage adequately on these issues, we will need more time to implement the federal government's decision. In addition, we established a provincial territorial working group on cannabis legalization to seek answers from the federal government and to report by November of this year with recommendations on how to move forward. In addition, that group will share best practices and we will work together collaboratively on how we can move forward and continue to work towards the current deadline. So we covered a lot of ground over the last 3 days. It was a very productive, constructive, and focused meeting where we found we had much more in common than that which might have divided us. As I said, we are all here to make life better, to help build a more hopeful and prosperous future for everyday families across this nation. Again, I thank all of the premiers for being here. We have a lot of work ahead of us. We always do. So as for today, we should continue on with that by starting with questions, although Premier Gallant will make some comments first.
Merci beaucoup. Let me just start off quickly saying on behalf of all the other premiers that we thank Premier Notley for hosting us here in Edmonton, and of course we thank her for her leadership. As you can imagine, there are some pretty big personalities in that room, and to have us go through the agenda and discuss all these important topics in a very concise and focused way is commendable, so we thank her for all her work. Comme a été dit par la première ministre Notley, le premier ministre de la Colombie-Britannique n'est pas ici. Nous comprenons bien sûr pourquoi. Nous sommes en train de penser aux gens de la Colombie-Britannique et bien sûr nous félicitons le premier ministre et nous avons bien hâte de travailler avec lui. Hier et assez aujourd'hui, nos discussions étaient concentrées sur l'économie et les emplois. Nous avons discuté des échanges commerciaux avec les États-Unis. Nous avons discuté de la possibilité de diversifier nos échanges commerciaux aussi avec des pays comme la Chine. Nous avons aussi travaillé ensemble, discuté ensemble de les infrastructures et comment on aimerait travailler avec le gouvernement fédéral en ayant des programmes qui offrent de la flexibilité. Nous avons parlé de la formation de la main-d'œuvre pour assurer que les Canadiens et Canadiennes ont les qualifications nécessaires pour aider notre économie. Nous avons parlé de l'innovation et nous avons parlé de la stratégie canadienne de l'énergie. Comme la première ministre Notley a indiqué, nous avons aussi parlé des approbations environnementales. Nous avons discuté d'essayer d'avoir de plus en plus la certitude et des délais raisonnables lorsque ça vient à voir les approbations environnementales. Nous avons aussi discuté des changements climatiques et plus spécifiquement le travail que nous avons besoin de faire pour l'adaptation. Aujourd'hui, nous avons parlé de la justice pénale. Considérant l'arrêt Jordan, nous avons parlé de comment nous pouvons travailler ensemble et avec le gouvernement fédéral pour réduire des délais juridiques et judiciaires. Nous avons parlé du cannabis. Le gouvernement fédéral a décidé de légaliser le cannabis, comme vous le savez. Les premiers ministres ont créé le groupe de travail provincial territorial sur la légalisation du cannabis. Ce groupe de travail, qui fera rapport au premier ministre au plus tard 1er novembre 2017, établira les préoccupations communes et les pratiques exemplaires en matière de légalisation et de réglementation du cannabis. Les premiers ministres, lors des discussions aujourd'hui, estiment que le cadre de gestion, la réglementation, la sensibilisation du public et l'application de la loi en vue d'appuyer cette légalisation entraîneront des coûts considérables pour les gouvernements provinciaux et territoriaux. Les premiers ministres ont donc aussi fait état des défis associés à la date de mise en œuvre du 1er juillet 2018 proposée par le gouvernement du Canada. Ils ont réitéré qu'ils auront notamment besoin de discuter et d'échanger de l'information avec le gouvernement fédéral pour être en mesure d'assurer adéquatement cette transition. Parmi les questions qui devront être résolues, sécurité routière et mécanismes visant l'application du Code de la sécurité routière, préparation et formation reliée au réseau de distribution, régime de taxation et prise en compte des coûts, campagne de sensibilisation du public, approvisionnement, demande et lien avec le marché illicite. Nous avons discuté aussi des opioïdes. Bien sûr, c'est tragique d'avoir des pertes de vie que nous avons eues ici au Canada. Alors, nous avons engagé à continuer à échanger des pratiques exemplaires entre nous et avec nos amis américains qui ont malheureusement aussi passé à travers et continuent de passer à travers de ces défis. Nous avons parlé de la couverture des médicaments assurés. Les premiers ministres ont l'intention de poursuivre leur travail de collaboration afin de réduire davantage les prix des médicaments. Les premiers ministres demandent aussi au gouvernement fédéral de continuer de collaborer avec les provinces et les territoires dans le cadre de ces travaux d'importance. Nous avons parlé aussi de la nutrition dans le nord du Canada. Les premiers ministres reconnaissent la nécessité de réduire le coût élevé de la nourriture et d'en assurer une meilleure disponibilité dans les communautés isolées du nord de notre pays. De plus, nous avons parlé des demandeurs du statut de réfugié. Les premiers ministres demandent au gouvernement fédéral de s'attaquer aux délais croissants dans le traitement des demandes d'asile et de travailler avec les gouvernements provinciaux et territoriaux aux prises avec un afflux de demandeurs du statut de réfugié. Et nous avons parlé de l'enquête nationale sur les femmes et les filles autochtones disparues et assassinées. Nous allons continuer de faire ce qu'on peut pour soutenir les organisations autochtones régionales et nationales qui insistent sur la nécessité d'aller de l'avant avec une approche axée sur les familles, qui respectera les personnes ayant vécu la perte d'être chère et leur rendra hommage. Et c'est ça dont nous avons discuté lors des 2 dernières journées.
I can just yell, okay. You might have to start again. That dog was distracting us, so if you could just do that whole thing over. Just kidding. That wasn't my actual question. This is for Premiers Palliser and Notley. When it comes to marijuana legalization, Premier Palliser, you were asking for sort of to come to a consensus and ask for a delay from Ottawa. With this working group, you wouldn't actually be asking for a delay if indeed you do until November. I'm wondering if you think that's enough, this working group is enough, and if asking for a delay in November is too late for the federal government to change their mind on that.
Well, I'll begin. I think try to be a little bit more clearly. I think what we're saying is that we've identified areas that need to be responded to by the federal government, and what we're saying right now is that that those need to be responded to in order for us to meet the deadline. And so in essence, we're raising that issue now, that it's not about a deadline or a specific date or an arbitrary date. It's about these issues have to be addressed by the federal government in order for us to meet that deadline. So that's why we're making that point right now. We'll work to the deadline, but as things stand right now, there's work that also needs to be done by the federal government in order for us to meet it. It has not yet been done. We're identifying what needs to be done, and we're hoping that they too will make adequate progress so that we're able to do this in a timely fashion.
I'm really pleased to all of us have acknowledged this is a serious issue, very important issue with ramifications in a number of areas, short, mid, and long term. And it would only be appropriate that we work jointly on a topic like this with the federal government, I think. So we will do that, but we need to step up and we need to see this work undertaken. The deadline that was given to us at the end of March of this year, and that gives us 15 months to get ready for this. So all of us, I believe, have concerns that need to be addressed, and in the best interests of the health of those who choose to use the products, in the best interests of the health and protection of those who are impacted by the decisions of others to use these products, we need to make sure that we do everything in our power to get it right, and we have one chance to get it right. So I'm pleased to see this encouragement of our federal partners to step up and assist in this, what is truly a monumental undertaking.
Just for the follow-up, you would ask for premiers to ask for a delay. Is this good enough for you? Does this satisfy what you wanted?
The will of my colleagues on this issue is good enough if the will of the federal government to respond is good enough.
For Premier Wynne, I'm wondering if you got as far as you'd hoped in advancing the conversation on pharmacare, and what roadblocks, if any, you ran into with your fellow premiers.
Well, let me just say that there was very much a consensus around the table that this is something that needs attention. And in fact, it's an issue that has been discussed for some time. Our provincial ministers of health have been having this conversation for a number of years, in fact. And so I was very pleased that my colleagues agreed to call on the federal government to engage actively in a discussion about establishing a national pharmacare plan. That is exactly, to my mind, what needs to happen now. There's a patchwork of programs across the country. There's no premier who believes that everything that needs to be in place is in place, and so we need to have this national conversation, and so I'm pleased that this call is going out to the federal government as of this meeting.
What do you think it'll take to get a breakthrough on pharmacare, maybe like the kind you got on Canada Pension?
Well, I think this is an issue, as I said, that has been on people's radar for some time. Provinces have moved in different ways to address it. I think we can all agree that it is a gap in Medicare. It's something that needs to be dealt with, and so we'll be working with we'll be asking our ministers to have this discussion and to engage with the federal government, and we will be sending, hasn't been finalized yet, but there'll be a letter that will be going from us to the Prime Minister to let him know that we are calling on the federal government at this point to step up and have this conversation with us, because we need to move forward.
Thank you.
Okay.
Premier Gallant, yesterday evening you spoke about access to abortion medication for people in your province. Would you be able to kind of speak to the decision that's happening in New Brunswick and why you feel to go down that path? And if there are any other premiers who would like to discuss the path going down your provinces as well?
As you may know, we have over the last 3 years, give or take a few months, worked very hard to ensure that we're advancing women's equality, and to specifically address your question, we're doing within that everything we can to ensure that we're providing women the access to choose. This is a fundamental right, and we're going to ensure that we reduce barriers for women to be able to access the medical services that they deserve. So to do so, we have in New Brunswick made it clear that the new pill called Mifi Gai Miso will be available free of charge for New Brunswick patients. I said during my speech last night that I'm not going to lecture or tell other provinces and territories how they should go about it. I can only tell you the situation that we have in New Brunswick. We have a couple hospitals that provide the procedure, which is a positive first step for sure. But we have some women that would find themselves in regions and communities in New Brunswick that would not be able to have the same geographical access. So for us, we see this as an opportunity to ensure that no matter where you're from or what your income bracket is in New Brunswick, as a woman, you'll be able to access this medical service if you choose to do so.
Anyone else want to respond to that? Or? No? Okay. Premier Couillard, I want to ask you about a hateful package sent to the Islamic Center in Montreal, in Quebec. Your reaction to that, and then how do we prevent stuff like that from happening, continuing to happen?
It's hard to prevent the darker sides of human nature. It's a repulsive act done by a coward, essentially. And that should be condemned and rejected. And it is rejected by the majority of Quebecers. This issue of coexistence of Quebecers of all creeds has been discussed a lot, as it is the case in other provinces. The view I like to keep and show the world is what happened after the tragic attack in January, when thousands of people in Quebec City were in the street claiming their affection, their love, even for their fellow Quebecers of Muslim persuasion. So that's the main message that has to come out. Given the unfortunate decision by a small number of people to reject the accommodation of a cemetery for the community, I've decided to take this issue in our own hands and find a solution, and we will find a solution with the community.
So to the Atlantic premiers, I'm wondering if the discussion around labor market development agreements with the feds, if you're worried about moving over to a per capita funding model. So I guess Premier McNeil, if maybe you wanted to start.
Thanks very much. If you look at the wording in the agreement, the base funding that was there from the old agreement will stay in the formula that was there, and what we have then said that the new agreement should reflect some of the changes that are happening within the country, and it will be based on need. So obviously with some of the changes that have happened in the oil fields here in Alberta, that we need to respond to that as a country. We still believe that there will be funding there available for us to respond to the needs of Nova Scotians and Atlantic Canadians, but I think every time you go through a process looking at a national program, you have to make sure they're updated to reflect the changes that are taking place all across our country, and this one is no different.
I think what you see there in the communique is one of the best examples of cooperation around the table. I think, if I can speak on behalf of my colleagues from Atlantic Canada, passionately talked about why this program is important for our economy and for the people of our provinces, as other provinces made a compelling argument as to why they feel that there should be changes. So we came to a place where we see the money that was allocated previously going with the same formula. That's to address some of the Atlantic Canadian premiers' concerns and suggestions. And the new money that would be allocated from the federal government could have a change in the formula that would help a province, say, like Alberta, that would have changing circumstances. So to me, it's a great example of how we're able to cooperate and compromise with each other, understanding that our provincial and territorial economies are very linked. So we all want everybody to be prosperous because it's good for all of us. And I believe it's also a clear sign that we're going to continue to work together on the number one priority of Canadians, which is the economy.
And I guess to follow up on a completely different topic, Premiers Wynne and Couillard, will Ontario and Quebec be setting the same minimum age for using legal cannabis?
So what we have talked about is that it's very important that Ontario and Quebec work together. We have a working group because of our shared border and the proximity of communities in Quebec and Ontario to one another. And we're in the process of having a consultation right now. Those decisions have not all been made, but I think the central concern, and I think that both people in Ontario and Quebec should rest assured that we will work very closely together.
Premier Couillard, do you think it's a good idea to have the same age as Ontario?
It must be the case. Kathleen and myself were on the Confederation Bridge on Canada Day, and imagine just the traffic there and the kind of traffic you would have if the age of consumption was different from one side of the river to the other. Not ideal, I would say. So we're working towards having as common a framework as we can have.
Thank you.
This question to Premiers Notley and Wynne, please. Given that as Premiers, or anyone else who wants to chime in, but given as Premiers you do hold First Ministers meetings now with the current Prime Minister, I'm wondering, Premier Notley, as having chaired this event, which some might consider to be rather modest compared to others that have been held, what's the value in even holding these COF summer meetings, given that, and we have telephones and Skype and everything else too?
Well, I can say quite definitively, having been in the room with the conversation, that trying to manage the energetic, thoughtful, focused input of all 13 people in the room over Skype or on the phone would have been a nightmare that I would have run screaming from. So, to be quite honest, I think they are very, very valuable opportunities for us to come together. We were able to share perspectives and experiences in both formal settings as well as, in between meetings at the events in the evenings and stuff, that I think really enhances collaboration, cooperation, and a shared view of our hopes for the country going forward. So it is absolutely important for us to be able to come together. It's also important for us to come together in our shared roles, because we are all leaders of our respective provinces, and so it makes sense that we can come together and talk about what we're doing and what we can do together in that role. So it absolutely is valuable. There's no question that meetings that include the Prime Minister are also valuable, but I think that that these continue to have a different type of value that is as important to the health of Confederation.
Let me just add to that, and I'm going to bring in the discussion of relationship into this, because we talked on our first day yesterday about our connections with the United States and the governor to premier to congressperson relationships, and the importance of getting to know people, so that if, for example, in the NAFTA discussion, there's a juncture where there's something that we're very concerned about, it is really important that we have that relationship with that governor or that congressperson, so we can call him or her and say, look, what are you hearing? What can we do? Who should we talk to? Likewise, and I would say an even more fundamental function, because these are our colleagues who with whom we share a country, it's very important that we know each other and that we're able to talk to each other in the most complete way possible. We could not have found some of the compromises that we found. Premier Gallant just referred to one on the labor market agreements. We could not have gotten there over the phone or on Skype. So the face-to-face conversations lead to, I would suggest, better relationships, which lead to better governance.
And as a follow-up, the cost is worth it?
Can I add, and I'll answer for my part. The answer is yes. There's a few other great examples of achievement as a result of this table that have benefited Canadians. We're saving over $1 billion in joint purchasing of pharmaceuticals because of the healthcare innovation that happened at this table that I don't think would have happened over the phone. Last year in Yukon, we struck a new agreement on internal trade that is an improvement, certainly an improvement over what we had, that I don't think you can come to in terms of a phone call. And with respect to comparing it to perhaps a First Minister's meeting, at those, it's been my experience so far that the federal government wants to determine what the agenda is, and it's usually one item, and they're not necessarily interested in the ends of any of our sentences as to other items on the agenda we think that need to be presented. Here we control the agenda and also can focus on results that I think might be more elusive were we to leave it to the telephone.
I just pitch in and say we're all part of the Canadian family, and ask yourself if you organize your family gatherings around Skype or a conference call. And if you do, that's probably because you don't like each other much. We have to work at liking each other. That's why we get together.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to quickly add that I do think it's important to point out to Canadians that we talk probably a dozen times in a year, if not more, and a lot of it is by phone and a lot of it is by other means. I do think once a year to get together just as premiers is important and is helpful, and I can tell you that some of the positions that were put into the communique would not have happened if we weren't in person, like Kathleen mentioned, and Premier Pallister pulled me aside on one of the things, and he'll say that he convinced me, I'll say that I convinced him, but we found a compromise, having a little bit of a sidebar as we're walking to lunch. So those are the type of things that you don't necessarily get to see, but I can tell you it's very helpful to ensure that we advance things that are important for Canadians.
Premier ministre Couillard, bonjour. J'aimerais vous entendre sur la crise des opioïdes. Le Collège des médecins affirme que c'est seulement une question de temps avant que la crise frappe le Québec, les surdoses mortelles frappent le Québec. Que fait le Québec pour s'y préparer et notamment pour monitorer les décès par surdose, qui ne semble pas être le cas pour l'instant?
Le travail est en cours, bien sûr, sous l'égide du ministre de la Santé. Et M. Barrette aura des choses plus précises à dire prochainement. Maintenant, je suis content que vous mentionniez le Collège des médecins dans votre intervention, parce que si vous lisez notre communiqué sur la question, on attire l'attention sur la responsabilité des professionnels de la santé dans cette crise. Il y a, à mon avis, pas mal de prescriptions d'opioïdes qui se font pour des raisons qui ne me semblent pas toujours liées à l'évidence scientifique. Et je pense qu'il y a une sorte, au fil des années, il y a une sorte de banalisation d'utilisation de l'opioïde dans la douleur chronique, qui ont fait en sorte que la situation, c'est une des raisons pour laquelle cette situation s'est présentée. Alors, je suis content de voir le Collège des médecins s'impliquer et s'inquiéter de la situation. Je suis certain qu'ils vont vouloir également regarder la propre responsabilité des professionnels de la santé dans la genèse de ce phénomène qui est très, très difficile et qu'on va bien sûr gérer.
Les médecins pharmaciens demandent de revoir la loi d'accès à l'information pour pouvoir partager l'information sur les prescriptions, s'assurer qu'un utilisateur ne va pas d'un endroit à l'autre recevoir plusieurs prescriptions. Êtes-vous ouvert à cette modification?
Dès qu'il est question de circulation d'informations personnelles sur les soins médicaux, c'est très délicat, comme vous le savez. Mais ça fait partie des choses sur lesquelles le Dr Barrette se penche actuellement.
Merci.
We have time for one final question, and then Premier Notley will make closing remarks.
I just quickly on the cannabis, the Prime Minister was asked a short time ago about a possibility of a delay, and he said that too many people are suffering under the current regime, and the nationwide rollout will happen on schedule. So if any of you want to react to his reaction to a possibility of a delay.
This is on cannabis? Yeah. Well, I think we expect, with the greatest of respect, that the Prime Minister will review the concerns that have been delineated in our communiqué, because they are not insignificant, and there is a great depth and breadth to the questions that need to be answered, and the engagement that the federal government needs to do in order to assist us in implementing that decision. So I absolutely anticipate that they will engage in it, and the reality is that we will move forward as quickly as we can, dependent upon the federal government's ability to engage in a fulsome way on the matters that we put forward, because they are important. Anyway, I'm not going to rehash the whole conversation that we had, but we listed the issues that are not yet resolved, that have a significant impact on implementation, and where the federal government has work to do.
On opioids, Premier Pallister?
That's great. The Prime Minister wants to stick to his deadline. That's super duper. Now, he needs to then hear what the premiers of his country, our country, have said we need help with. There are a number of significant and serious public policy issues here. They need to be addressed. They should be addressed cooperatively. We need to see that cooperation. If we get this wrong, the same consequences that the Prime Minister is alluding to may well occur in a negative way for a number of Canadians. We're all concerned about the safety of those who choose to use these products. The safety of those who choose not to use these products may also be impacted by the decisions made by those who choose to use them. We need to work together. And so a deadline is fine if the commitment is there to work with the provinces to assist us in getting the job done. And that's what we're asking for. We're asking for that cooperation. It's obvious we should work jointly on a project of this nature, in particular because it's pot.
And if I could just add, the starting point of this conversation is not the federal government having one time frame and the provincial government questioning the time frame. The starting point is, have we met the public safety concerns? Are we sure that we have the provisions in place to protect youth? Do we understand what the highway traffic implications are? It's those issues that we have to resolve, because we have to make sure we can keep people safe. That's the starting point of the conversation for us.
All right, and just a follow-up on opioids. I noticed that when you were that in the release you talk about federal funding that's largely targeted towards the RCMP. Is this where you see the federal funding as falling down at this point on the problem of opioids, or are there other areas you would like to see the federal government step up and put more money in?
I think at this point, where it's a matter of the enforcement provisions that were identified, quite frankly, by the province of BC, which, as you know, is the province that has the largest problem in the country, although it is also a problem that we all understand is on its way to us. And in fact, it certainly is very, very serious here in Alberta, and is growing in other provinces already. So that's not just it. We also are calling upon the federal government to engage in cross-border discussions with U.S. public health officials, because they actually have this problem as well, and in some ways are farther along the road, and so we need to engage with them. And then again, as we've talked about, as provinces, we need to share best practices and also look at the way in which we engage with health professionals and how their practices may best be changed and adapted to reduce the growth of this problem. So there were a number of different issues. That one wasn't all about calling on the federal government for money. It was about a number of different actions that can be taken by all of us. Thank you. So thank you very much. I don't actually have closing remarks, but I do know that Premier Gallant does. So thank you all very much for coming. It's been a pleasure once again for me to be here with all of my provincial colleagues, and Premier Gallant, take it away.
Encore une fois, merci beaucoup, Première ministre Notley, pour votre leadership et pour nous guider lors des 3 jours que nous avons ici à Edmonton. Je suis très fier que les premiers ministres et les premières ministres vont venir au Nouveau-Brunswick l'an prochain. We're very pleased that on July 18th to 20th of next year, the premiers will be meeting in New Brunswick. We're very excited to show all the premiers what New Brunswick is all about. We're going to be meeting in beautiful St. Andrews by the Sea, and we'll be at the resort that you may have heard of before, the Algonquin. And for those who are wondering, just like this beautiful hotel, it is dog-friendly, so if you want to bring your dogs to the press conference, you certainly can. And we look forward to having everybody join us for a good time and good New Brunswick hospitality. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.